This is Monica Perez with the seventh part. This is part seven of our reading and discussion. It's basically my reading and reacting to some of the shocking things in these books, these conspiracy classics I'm pulling out. This is Mass Control Engineering Human Consciousness by Jim Keith. I did a couple over the weekend. So if you missed it, you can go back. I've got a playlist on youtube.com/Monica Perez. And I always put it Saturday morning, Saturday story time on my podcasting feed on your favorite podcasting platform. But I want to tell you what the next book I want to read is. I'll have to peruse it or skim through it a little bit to double check because I remember being blown away by this book when I first read it. But it was written in 2010. So it's post 9/11. He's probably got his finger on the pulse, but I have to double check. Anyway, I'm pretty excited about it when we do get to it. Psychological Warfare and the New World Order, The Secret War Against the American People by Servando Gonzalez. And if anybody knows how to get in touch with him, I've asked him on my show and I've never been able to track him down. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to this couple of chapters of this today. Chapter 14. Consolidating control. During the Nixon administration, psychiatric and police organizations merged their efforts on many fronts. Richard Nixon and members of his staff met with agents of the Justice Department's Law Enforcement Assistance Administration and Dr. Bertram Brown, director of the National Institute of Mental Health. LEAA was also involved in plans for the creation of a national police force and urban warfare preparation that went by the names Operation Cable Splicer and Operation Garden Plot. I have read that it was under the Nixon administration that we started having regionalization, and that continues on today. There are federal, law enforcement regions. I'm sure you're a part of one, probably don't even know it. That all started with Nixon, if my information is correct. Incredibly, the LEAA began the financing of 350 National Institute of Mental Health psychiatric projects, with LEAA directly monitoring the NIMH doctors, NIMH doctors. These projects included screening children for psychological problems, experiments in behavior modification and psychosurgery, drugging programs in prison, including the use of nausea and terror-inducing drugs, and shock treatment programs. I'm not a big fan of screening, especially for mental health issues. I had a psychiatrist tell me once that no one is psychologically perfect. So if you're screening or using psych tests for anything from gun licenses to how to raise your kids, they're going to find something. And especially if they're looking. And of course, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You would know if something was wrong. You don't have to screen healthy people. That's my opinion. By the 1960s, due in part to an increasing uproar from the public for accountability by the government, some officials had begun to scrutinize, at least at a superficial level, the excesses of intelligence and other official agencies in experimentation and mind manipulation of the public. Concerns of U.S. intelligence agencies about this scrutiny were expressed in a 1962 Inspector General report on MK Ultra. The report said a few things. It's a list. A, research in the manipulation of human behavior is considered by many authorities in medicine and related fields to be professionally unethical. Therefore, the reputation of professional participants in the program are on occasion in jeopardy. B, some of these activities raise questions of legality implicit in the original charter of the CIA. I'd like to read the original charter of the CIA. C, a final phase of certain projects places the rights and interests of U.S. citizens in jeopardy. D, public disclosure of some aspects could induce serious adverse reaction in the U.S. public opinion, as well as stimulate offensive and defensive action in this field on the part of foreign intelligence services. So we always say They're doing it, so we have to do it. But this is saying if we do it, they're going to do it. In the US government publication, Individual Rights and the Federal Role in Behavior Modification, a study prepared by the staff of the Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights of the Committee of the Judiciary in 1974, it was revealed that, quote, a number of departments and agencies, including the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, the Veterans Administration, the Department of Defense, and the National Science Foundation, fund, participate in, or otherwise sanction research involving various aspects of behavior modification in the absence of effective review structures, guidelines, or standards for participation. One of the results of Senate scrutiny of these programs was that the head of the LEAA was interrogated. He announced that the LEAA would discontinue funding for psychosurgery and that funding for other behavior modification programs would be discontinued by the organization. Nothing of the sort happened, with LEAA funding for behavior control continuing. At the Atmore State Prison in Alabama, at least 50 psychosurgical operations took place. According to Dr. Swan of Fisk University, these were lobotomies performed on Black political activists. In 1977, a Senate hearing into Central Intelligence Agency drug experimentation was launched, which had the effect of driving CIA programs underground, according to ex-CIA agent Victor Marchetti. He's a little bit sketchy, isn't he? See the guy who wrote Helter Skelter? Because that was completely wrong. Or the JFK thing. He wrote one. Bugliosi was the other. One was Marchetti, one was Bugliosi. I don't can't remember if they were both sketchy or what. Okay. To secure the survival of their projects, networks, and funding the mind controllers had to a great degree abandon scientific and military laboratories and seek deeper cover. A probable byproduct of the scrutiny that Congress was applying to behavior control is that researchers in mind control began to work unofficially or hid their activities through a variety of other ruses by performing their experimentation on the voiceless incarcerated of the prison and psychiatric systems or in the inner city, by manipulating or starting cults and using them as a cover for their projects, by hiding their work within the tentacles of criminal enterprises, or by undocumented mind control projects performed on an unsuspecting populace. Now, for the sake of secrecy, there would be no official paper trail. The great majority of documentation relating to MK Ultra and its related projects was destroyed, and never again would the mind controllers make the mistake of documenting their evil. Mind control operations were hidden in undocumented Black projects and intelligence agency cutouts of all types, providing cover and deniability for the perpetrators. Government and heads of intelligence agencies looked the other way at violations of human rights, or sometimes they continued to gaze with unconcealed delight. Chapter 15, Guerrilla Mind War. The Symbionese Liberation Army, the revolutionary group that kidnapped heiress Patty Hearst in 1974, like Jonestown, was created at the fringes of U.S. intelligence. The group's leader, Donald DeFreeze, known as Cinque, Cinque, was employed as a paid informant by the Los Angeles Police Department's Public Disorder Unit from 1967 to 1969, then directed the Black Cultural Association at the prison deceptively titled the Vacaville Medical Facility, which researcher Alex Constantine has alleged to be a covert mind control unit with funding from the CIA channeled through SRI, which is the Stanford Research Institute, originator of Siri. Behavior modification was performed on DeVries at Vacaville, where documentation suggests electronic brain implanting and lobotomies, among other techniques, have been employed. Does anyone know if Charles Manson was at Vacaville? I think he might have been. Check that. If I don't have an answer now, I'll tell you next time. The Black Cultural Association was run by Colston Westbrook, a Black CIA expert in psychological warfare who had participated in the Operation Phoenix assassination and mind control program in Vietnam. Gosh, that was really brutal. If you've never heard of that, that's a serious one. And some people say, and maybe can prove that they do it to us now, that that was just like a trial phase. Westbrook's controller is alleged to have been the CIA's William Herman, the man who originated the idea of the violence center that Louis Jolyon West would champion during Reagan's governorship of California. There's a definite connection between Jolly West and Charles Manson. Veteran conspiracy watcher Mae Brussel asked, why was CIA agent Colston Westbrook educated in psychological warfare and the indoctrination of assassination and terrorist cadres chosen to select and train the group that became the SLA? Joseph Ramiro and Nancy Ling Perry, important to the SLA for military tactics and cover story rhetoric, were dependent upon drugs. Both were political conservatives with a kill a commie for Christ background. Their transition into radicals could have been assisted by the same chemical and psychological controls our intelligence agencies are using and experimenting with daily. Bill and Emily Harris and Angela Atwood worked together as a Mod Squad narc team back home in Indiana for the Indiana State Police. What brought them all scurrying to the Bay Area in the summer of 1972? Russell Little and Robin Steiner, college chums from the University of Florida, drove out together from Florida to Oakland in the summer of 72. Though neither had shown any previous interest in blacks or prisoners, both immediately began working with Colston Westbrook and Donald DeFries at Vacaville Medical Facility. Camilla Hall and Patricia Saltwick were at least authentic residents of the Berkeley community. What controls were used to draw them into the SLA and ultimately to their deaths in Los Angeles? According to Brussel, in March 1974, a prison in Soledad was offered a chance to escape by 3 prison officials if he would join the SLA army. I feel like did we know about these people's death? Camilla Hall and Patricia whatever? Maybe they'll tell us. Eris Hurst, abducted by the SLA, was subjected to sophisticated mind control programming that turned her into a changeling, as defined by CIA brain banger Louis Jolyon West, who commented on her case, quote, prolonged environmental stress or life situations profoundly different from the usual can disrupt the normally integrative functions of personality. Individuals subjected to such forces may adapt through disassociation by generating an altered persona or pseudo-identity. According to West, Patricia Hurst, violently abducted by members of the Symbionese Liberation Army in February of 1974, was brutalized, raped, tortured, and forced to participate in illegal acts, beginning with the bank robbery for which she was later, in our view, wrongly convicted. The traumatic kidnapping and subsequent 2 months of torture produced in her a state of emotional regression and fearful compliance with the demands and expectations of her captors. This was quickly followed by the coerced transformation of Patty into her alter ego, Tanya, and subsequently, less well known to the public, into alter ego Pearl. After additional trauma over a period of many months, Tanya was merely a role coerced on pain of death. It was Pearl who later represented the pseudo-identity which was found on psychiatric examination by one of us, West, shortly after Hurst's arrest by the FBI. Chronic symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, were also prominent in this case. I mean, but you can't believe anything Jolly West says. I mean, that may be true, but just because he said it doesn't actually get us any closer to the truth. And I would like to know if the Symbionese Liberation Army was a I believe it was a full-on CIA construct. I could be wrong, maybe it was infiltrated, I don't know, but I mean, the name itself, I didn't Monty Python do a whole basically skit in one of their movies about how ridiculous it all was? I think that was Life of Brian, which is extremely, blasphemous, I think so. Not recommending it, but it was interesting in that regard. According to Dr. Colin Ross, Jim Jones and the People's Temple were closely connected to the SLA. Oh, the Symbionese Liberation Army. Jim Jones was a good PR guy. When Patty Hearst was kidnapped, he offered William Randolph Hearst a program to set up a collection slash donation of money to pay the ransom to the SLA. And the SLA was demanding something like $170 million from Hearst for the release of Patty Hearst. Jim Jones offered to set up this fund, but Hearst said no. The next outcome was that the SLA also wanted food donated to poor people that they said they were representing in a revolution. So a committee was set up to do food distribution, financed by William Randolph Hearst. According to this book, the way that food distribution was done was Jim Jones got control of the mechanisms and he brought people down from the People's Temple to be the homeless and poor people who received the food. And the same food was distributed around the network 6 times, constantly being picked up by new People's Temple people and taken back to the distribution point. So actually, only 1/6 as much food was purchased as it appeared, and the rest was skimmed by the People's Temple. One person who survived the Jonestown deaths relates that Hearst's boyfriend, Stephen Weed, had been to the People's Temple compound in Ukiah and was seen talking to Jim Jones 3 months prior to the kidnapping of Hearst. Another example of government funding of, quote, counterculture political groups involved in terrorism. According to an Associated Press report from January 10th, 1976, the FBI created and funded a group called the Secret Army Organization, SAO, in the early 70s. The San Diego Union reports the SAO, a division of the Weather Underground, was involved in urban guerrilla warfare, including murder, kidnappings, bombings, and arson, and was, according to AP, a centrally designed and externally financed infrastructure designed for terror and sabotage. These acts were sanctioned by the nation's most powerful and highly respected law enforcement agency, the FBI. That was a quote from the San Diego Union. The Union reports that the SAO was guided and funded by Howard Berry Godfrey, who paid the expenses of the secret army, recruited new members, supplied the explosives, and picked out targets. Godfrey was a paid FBI informer who had helped to fund the SAO on the orders of the FBI. Of course, OKC you're reminded of, but the 1995, or was it 93, World Trade Center bomb had a similar story. Imad Salem was the informant on that one. So I just want to read some of the footnotes here because there's a couple that are interesting. Dr. Ross gave a lecture at the 9th Annual Western Clinical Conference on Trauma and Dissociation in April 1996. It was called The CIA and Military Mind Control Research, Building the Manchurian Candidate. Alex Constantine, Virtual Government, CIA Mind Control Operations in America, published in 1997. May Brussel, Why Was Patty Hearst Kidnapped? Looks like that's in Paranoid Women Collect Their Thoughts. And then there's a Jolly West, an essay in Dissociation, Clinical and Theoretical Perspectives. The essay is called Pseudo-Identity and the Treatment of Personality Change in Victims of Captivity and Cults. Okay, chapter 16, The Greening of America, Monarch. Now, I remember this. It's so funny. Operation Monarch, the color is green. So you'll see, I mean, you can find green anywhere, but like the Ebola campaign in Africa was green. I think there was a famous green dress that Marilyn Monroe wore. And I remember when I first, like, started figuring this stuff out, I was shopping with my radio producer at the time, and she was a friend of mine, and I was in, like, a store buying a dress, and I was like, "Ooh, MK Ultra green now, I don't want that one," and she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm thinking, you get so far down the rabbit hole that you think your references are things everybody knows about, and of course, no one knows about them. Now, maybe a little bit more, but anyway, it's like an emerald kinda green. Anyway, one of the problems of researching covert control is obvious. We are attempting to delve into programs that are secret and meant to remain so. For this reason, there is often no paper trail to follow, and the researcher must pick his way through thickets of conflicting information and first person accounts that sometimes lack substantiation and challenge our current belief systems. Yes, so true. It is often a difficult task to sort out fact from fiction, reality from delusion, or disinformation. After CIA mind control programs were severed as official projects in the 60s and 70s, the paper trail becomes sporadic. The Freedom of Information Act, which has provided at least a partial view of what took place during the MK Ultra era, now fails us entirely. One is forced to access primarily first person accounts, some of them contradictory, some of them plainly delusory, Delusory, like as in delusions. Determining the truth becomes difficult, and it is evident that there are many areas of our knowledge of mind control programs that will take years to understand, to clarify. An area of research that still demands corroboration and definition is what has come to be known as Project Monarch. On June 25th, 1992, psychologist Dr. Corridon Hammond gave a talk to an audience of psychology professionals at the fourth annual Eastern Regional Conference on Abuse and Multiple Personality in Alexandria, Virginia. The title of the lecture was Hypnosis in MPD, Ritual Abuse. And it was one of the first public presentations which seems to expose a vast terra incognita in the area of mind control research. Dr. Hammond began his presentation by commenting on the prevalence of multiple personality disorder cases who had apparently suffered ritual abuse at the hand of mind controllers, and his own efforts to understand what was going on by interviewing other psychologists and psychiatrists who were encountering the same type of cases around the country. Carefully, quote, without leading or contaminating, as Hammond says, he cross-checked with other mental health care professionals, comparing cases until he felt that he had a good sense of what was going on. Hammond stated that in as many as 2/3 of the ritual abuse cases that existed, the victims had been subjected to a highly developed and uniform technology of mind control, suggesting that there is a large network of practitioners of this kind practicing. This observation goes along with my own belief that the CIA, beginning in the 1940s, labored long in creating a secret science of mind control, the details of which are only now coming to light. What we know of MK Ultra is the tip of the iceberg. Often, according to Hammond, these will be bloodline people. That is, persons programmed by their parents who are involved in cultic practices such as Satanism or in intelligence agency programs. Yes, I think that is true. And it is so, so hard to get your mind around that. That crazy video I've shared of that woman who was involved in human hunting parties. Maybe I should play a clip of that uh, on one of my newsreels because I think she was saying her parents got her and the other kids involved in it. It was really messed up, and it makes sense. Even though it's hard to believe, but it would explain some things. I mean, Johnny Gosh thing, um, maybe the Franklin cover up. Anyway, Hammond said, when you start to find the same highly esoteric information in different states and different countries, from Florida to California, you start to get an idea that there's something going on that is very large, very well coordinated, with a great deal of communication and systematicness to what's happening. So I have gone from someone kind of neutral and not knowing what to think about it all to someone who clearly believes ritual abuse is real and that the people who say it isn't are either naive, like people who didn't want to believe the Holocaust, or they're dirty. According to Hammond, what they basically do is they will get a child and they will start this in basic forms, it appears, by about 2.5 after the child's already been made dissociative. They'll make him dissociative not only through abuse, like sexual abuse, but also things like putting a mousetrap on their fingers and teaching the parents, you do not go in until the child stops crying. Ugh. Only then do you go in and remove it. They start in rudimentary forms at about 2.5 and kick into high gear, it appears, around 6 or 6.5, continue through adolescence with periodic reinforcements in adulthood. What monsters! Basically, in the program, the child will be put typically on a gurney. They will have an IV in one hand or arm. They'll be strapped down, typically naked. There'll be wires attached to their head to monitor electroencephalograph patterns. They will see a pulsing light, most often described as red, occasionally white or blue. They'll be given, most commonly, I believe, Demerol. Then they will describe a pain on one ear, their right ear usually, where it appears a needle has been placed. And they will hear weird, disorienting sounds in that ear while they see photic stimulation to drive the brain into a brainwave pattern with a pulsing light at a certain frequency. Then, after a suitable period, when they're in a certain brainwave state, they will begin programming oriented to self destruction and debasement of the person. Hammond says that many of the cases dramatizing MPD phenomena have connections to the CIA and military installations. He describes one patient who went to a cult school where mind control sessions would take place several times a week. She would go into a room, get all hooked up. When she was in a proper altered state, now they were no longer having to monitor it with electroencephalographs. They also had already had placed on her electrodes, one in the vagina, for example, 4 on the head. Sometimes they'll be on other parts of the body. They will then begin and they would say to her, you are angry with someone in the group. She'd say, no, I'm not. And they would violently shock her. They would say the same thing until she complied and didn't make any negative response. They would continue. And dude, I just got kicked off Twitter. You think it's because of what I just said? I was hesitant to read that. I'll probably have to take this off of YouTube. PDQ. That's too bad. Okay. I thought that. I was like, should I say that? Dang it. Okay, they will describe a pain in one ear. Okay, they would continue. And because you are angry with someone in the group, or when you are angry with someone in the group, you will hurt yourself. Do you understand? She said. No. And they shocked her. They repeated again. Do you understand? Well, yes, but I don't want to. Shock her again until they get compliance. Then they keep adding to it. And you will hurt yourself by cutting yourself. Do you understand? Maybe she'd say yes, but they might say, we don't believe you, and shock her anyway. Go back and go over it again. They would continue in this sort of fashion. Okay. Oh, yes, yes. I know satanic secretly boosted is saying, SRA is real. I do, but It's just, it takes a while to get it through your head that people are doing this to their own kids. That's the thing that is just hard for me to get my mind around. But I do think it has to be true. "Do you understand?" She said. I'm freaked that they took me off of Twitter in real time like that. That's freaking me out. So, I don't know. Maybe it's back up. I don't know. She said, "No," and they shocked her. They repeated again, "Do you understand?" "Well, yes, but I don't want to." Shock her again until they get compliance. Then they keep adding to it. "And you will hurt yourself by cutting yourself. Do you understand?" Maybe she'd say yes, but they might say, "We don't believe you," and shock her anyway. Go back and go over it again. They would continue in this sort of fashion. She said typically it seemed as though they'd go about 30 minutes, take a break for a smoke or something, and come back. They may review what they'd done and stopped, or they might review what they'd done and go on to new material. She said the sessions might go half an hour. They might go 3 hours. She estimated 3 times a week. Programming under the influence of drugs in a certain brainwave state, and with these noises in one ear and then speaking in the other ear, usually the left ear, associated with right hemisphere non dominant brain functioning, and with them talking, therefore, and requiring intense concentration, intense focusing, because often they'll have to memorize and say certain things back, word perfect, to avoid punishment, shock, and other kinds of things that are occurring. There will be very standardized types of hypnotic things done at times. There will be sensory deprivation, which we know increases suggestibility in anyone. Total sensory deprivation suggestibility has significantly increased from the research. A lot of this is reminding me of Clockwork Orange, especially like they're doing it on Social Outcasts. And of course, Stanley Kubrick did that. He probably did the moon landing, Eyes Wide Shut. It's interesting. Hammond has come to believe that there are several levels of programming within the patients with whom he has worked that can be accessed by letters of the Greek alphabet. Although Hammond does not mention it, these designations may have been roughly derived from the classifications in the classic eugenics tract Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Some of these letter designations follow. The first level, alpha, is generalized mind control, the base level of programming of the subject, and characterized by augmented memory and the splitting of the mind into left and right brain divisions. Beta is apparently programming of sexuality and the destruction of moral inhibitions. Gamma is a level providing mind control system protection involving deception and misdirection. Delta is the assassin programming level, and it includes killers trained to perform ritual sacrifice. Theta is termed the psychic killer level. According to Hammond, I had never in my life heard those two terms paired together. I'd never heard the words psychic killers put together. But when you have people in different states, including therapists, inquiring and asking, "What is theta?" and patients say to them, "Psychic killers," it tends to make one a believer that certain things are very systematic and very widespread. This comes from their belief in psychic sorts of abilities and powers, including their ability to psychically communicate with, quote, mother, and including their ability to psychically cause somebody to develop a brain aneurysm and die. Omega is the level of programming dictating self destruction and is intended to cause the subject to commit suicide when they are interrogated or begin therapy. Hammond believes that this type of program was originally created by the CIA, and in particular by Dr. L. Wilson Green, whose original name Hammond reports was Greenbaum. Among the code names used for the program is Green Tea and Ultra Green. Hammond, green tree. Greenbaum means green tree. Greenbaum, like Tannenbaum. Hammond describes a self-destruction programming. This was called the Green Bomb, BOMB. Lots of interesting internal consistencies like that play on words with Dr. Greenbaum, his original name. Bomb, BOMB. That is interesting. Now, in this case, it was done to her at age 9 for the first time. Only hers was different. Hers was a suggestion for amnesia. If you ever remember anything about ultra green and the green tree, you will go crazy. You will become a vegetable and be locked up forever. Then finally, the suggestions added, And it will be easier to just kill yourself than have that happen to you if you ever remember it. Remember the letters that I think it was the FBI wrote to Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself? I think that it was like actually suggested that because I think they had blackmail on him. At age 12, then, 3 years later, they used what sounds like a sodium amytal interview to try to breach the amnesia and find out if they could. They couldn't. So then they strapped her down again, gave her something to kind of paralyze her body, gave her LSD, and reinforced all the suggestions. And they did a similar thing at the age of 16. One area where mind control programming takes place, according to Hammond, is in southern Utah. Remember the process church, Hammond asked in his presentation? Roman Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, was killed by the Manson family, who were associated with the process church. A lot of prominent people in Hollywood were associated, and then they went underground, the books say, in about 1978 and vanished. Well, they're alive and well in southern Utah. We have a thick file in the Utah Department of Public Safety documenting that they moved to southern Utah, north of Monument Valley, bought a movie ranch in the desert, renovated it, expanded it, built a bunch of buildings there, carefully monitored so that very few people go out of there and no one can get in, and change their names. A key word in their name is foundation, the foundation. Oh, changed their name from the process church to the foundation. Hammond's allegations about ritual abuse in Utah are supported by a document I received in 1991. This was a copy of a memo authored by a general authority of the Mormon Church, second counselor in the presiding bishopric, Glenn L. Pace, directed to the Strengthening Church Members Committee. Suffice it to say that I am not a Mormon. I'm not a member of any organized religious group, but that members of the church sent it to me. According to the memo, which has, quote, do not reproduce emblazoned across its masthead, Mr. Pace has met with 60 victims of ritual abuse in Utah. Pace writes, that number could be twice or 3 times as many if I did not discipline myself to only 1 meeting per week. Of the 60 victims with whom I have met, 53 are female and 7 are male. 8 are children. The abuse occurred in the following places: 37 in Utah, 3 in Idaho, 4 in California, 2 in Mexico, and 14 in other places. 53 victims are currently living in the state of Utah. All 60 individuals are members of the Mormon Church. 45 victims allege witnessing and or participating in human sacrifice. The majority were abused by relatives, often their parents. Those are some serious allegations. I'm looking to see this is Hammond. Okay, it says the majority were abused by, okay. All have developed psychological problems, and most have been diagnosed as having multiple personality disorder or some other form of dissociative disorder. The only footnote, so it's Hammond's speech, and the only footnote here is Bishop Glenn Pace. The name of the memo is Ritualistic Child Abuse, and it's a memo to the Strengthening Church Members Committee of the Mormon Church from July 19th, 1990. And Jim Keith says he received this. Pace reports, I don't pretend to know how prevalent the problem is. All I know is that I have met with 60 victims. Assuming that each one comes from a coven of 13, we are talking about the involvement of 800 or so right here on the Wasatch Front in Utah. Obviously, I have only seen those coming forth to get help. Oh, wow. And if they're programming them not to get help, that's not going to be a big percentage. I can only assume that it is expanding geometrically, and I'm horrified the numbers represented by the generation who are now children and teenagers. Pace goes on to detail the mindset of these cultic victims with information more reminiscent of the type of intelligence agency mind manipulation that Hammond speaks of than straight Satanism. The memories seem to come in layers. For example, the first memory might be of incest. Then they remember robes and candles. Next, they realize that their father or mother or both were present when they were being abused. Another layer will be the memory of seeing other people hurt and even killed. Then they remember having seen babies killed. Another layer is realizing that they participated in the sacrifices. One of the most painful memories may be that they even sacrificed their own baby. With each layer of memory comes another set of problems with which they must deal. Is the Pace memo an accurate representation of what is going on? Is Hammond correct in his view about a vast mind control underground? The main problem with Hammond's testimony is the difficulty in substantiating his statements. We do know, however, that the reports of many persons who believe that they have been victims of mind control coincide with the information that Hammond has brought forward. I remember that about this book, that at a certain point in the 70s, when they had those committees investigating everything from MK Ultra, Mockingbird, the heart attack gun, assassinations, after that, this stuff all went deep underground. I mean, I even think weather control was one of the things that went deep underground at that point. Chapter 17, Claudia Mullen. In March 1995, Claudia Mullen spoke before a U.S. Presidential Advisory Committee investigating government radiation experiments after World War II. Mullen stated to the commission, "Between the years 1957 and 1984, I became a pawn in the government's game. Its ultimate goal was mind control and to create the perfect spy, all through the use of chemicals, radiation, drugs, hypnosis, electric shock, isolation in tubs of water, sleep deprivation, brainwashing, verbal, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. I was exploited unwittingly for nearly 3 decades of my life, and the only explanations given to me were that the end justifies the means, and I was serving my country in their bold effort to fight communism. I can only summarize my circumstances by saying that they took an already abused 7-year-old child and compounded my suffering beyond belief. The saddest part is, I know for a fact I was not alone. There were countless other children in my same situation, and there was no one to help us until now. I've already submitted as much information as possible, including conversations overheard at the agencies responsible. I'm able to report all of this to you in such detail because of my photographic memory and the arrogance of the people involved. They were certain they would always control my mind. Although the process of recalling these atrocities is not an easy one, nor is it without some danger to myself and my family, I feel the risk is worth taking." Mullen fingered Dr. Sidney Gottlieb and members of the TSD, or Technical Science Division of the CIA, as being the primary co-conspirators in her abuse. In 1958, they told me I was to be tested by some important doctors from the Society or the Human Ecological Society, and I was instructed to cooperate. I was told not to look at anyone's faces and to try hard to ignore any names because this was a very secret project. I was told all these things to help me forget. Naturally, as most children do, I did the opposite and remembered as much as I could. According to Mullen, I was told by Sid Gottlieb that I was ripe for the big A, meaning Project Artichoke. Mullen continued, "The next year I was sent to a lodge in Maryland to learn how to sexually please men." Mullen said that this was an attempt by high-ranking members of the CIA to fill, quote, "as many high government agency officials and heads of academic institutions and foundations as possible, so that later, when the funding for mind control and radiation started to dwindle, projects would continue. I was used to entrap many unwitting men, including themselves, all with the use of a hidden camera." Boy, this is well before anyone heard of Jeffrey Epstein. "I was only 9 years old when the sex humiliation began. I overheard conversations about part of the agency called ORD, which I found out was Office of Research and Development." That's really interesting because when you think of the picture of, uh, gosh, how can I forget her name? The girl, she was, I think, 15, maybe even 17 at some point, she was the famous one who sued Jeffrey Epstein, and she's seen in the picture with Prince Andrew. She's pretty old. I've never seen any pictures of any of those guys with somebody shockingly young, but why not? Why don't we have those? Why is that the only one we've seen? And that's the one that you think, "Well, not that young." One occasion, Mullen heard because she looks like a full-grown woman. She looks physically mature, which is, less shocking. Man. One occasion, Mullen heard a high-ranking CIA mind control doctor state that in order to keep more funding coming from different sources for radiation and mind control projects, he suggested stepping up the amounts of stressors used and also the blackmail portions of the experiments. He said it needed to be done faster than to get rid of the subjects, or they were asking for us to come back later and haunt them with our remembrances. Mullen said that I would love nothing more than to say that I dreamed all this up and need to just forget it. But that would be a tragic mistake. It would also be a lie. All these atrocities did occur to me and to countless other children, and all under the guise of defending our country. It is because of the cumulative effects of exposure to radiation, chemicals, drugs, pain, subsequent mental and physical distress that I have been robbed of the ability to work and even to bear children of my own. It is blatantly obvious that none of this was needed, nor would ever have been allowed to take place at all. And the only means we have to seek out the awful truth and bring it to light is by opening whatever files remain on all the projects and through another presidential commission on mind control. She's still naive after all this. Commissions or cover-ups, just so you know. I believe that every citizen of this nation has the right to know what is fact and what is fiction. It is our greatest protection against this ever happening again. In conclusion, I can offer you no more than what I have given you today, the truth. Mullen recalls that one of her government tormentors had a Scottish accent and called her Lassie. I almost fell off my chair, Mullen's therapist, Valerie Wolf, recalled when she saw a film of CIA mind controller Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron addressing a female patient and calling her Lassie. Later in a radio interview, Claudia Mullen further described the extent of her mind control ordeal, which she says continued from 1957 to 1983. I was tested at Tulane and at several other places outside of New Orleans. And then once they decided I could become part of the projects, and they had a series of projects, the Umbrella Project and the Bluebird, which became Artichoke and then became MK Ultra, and each one on down the line. Each one had a different purpose. I was taken on train trips, planes, small planes to different military bases. I was taken to places out in the woods. I guess Tulane was the worst, where I would receive intense electric shock, isolation for days, sleep deprivation where they would attach electrodes to me. And if I started to fall asleep, they would shock me enough to wake me up. You couldn't sleep for days. The messages would start. Quote, your mother doesn't love you. She left you here. Your mother doesn't want you. You are too much trouble for her. You are a very evil child. You want to hurt people. You want to entice men. My adoptive father was very ill and he died when I was very young. So I was taught to take to older men and encouraged to become friendly with older men. And eventually, when I was old enough, I was sent out into what they called the operational field. And I would be photographed with government and agency officials, CIA officials, doctors who were consulted, heads of universities and private foundations, all under the chance that if the government funds started dwindling, they wanted to be able to blackmail or coerce the men into making sure the projects continued. That was the ultimate goal. The projects had to continue at all costs. They had to train a certain amount of young females to go around, and I was sent to a camp in Maryland for 3 weeks when I was 9 years old, and that was my first training on how to sexually please men. Dude, I'm super worried about reading this now. I don't know. I'm going to power through this and then I'm going to take it down. I went through a training course like a seminar. There were children of all ages, even younger than myself. Teenagers, young adult girls were there. We were all assigned someone there. And at the end of 3 weeks, we were taught. They decided it was a success. It was a CIA project. It was called imaginative research. They had to give a name to it that they could release and document because they couldn't really put down what it really was. It came under the heading MK Ultra, Project 74, and I was subject number 3. I remember we were given a number. We were allowed to choose a name, and after the 3 weeks, I was sent home. For the next few years, they worked on making sure I was amnesia controlled, making sure the amnesia barriers were in place so that if something should ever happen to me and the memory should ever start coming back, the pain would come first. I would seek help from the doctors who I was taught were the only people who could help me, the good doctors. I was taught that doctors were the answer to everything. Nicole Kidman's father was accused of being one of those doctors. I never saw any substantiation, but I had never heard of it before hearing that rumor. I had no reason to disbelieve that because every time I was sent home, I was told, "You are a good girl. You are cured. You are going to be just fine. You are going to grow up and have lots of kids." I didn't even realize that they had taken that away from me. I didn't know I couldn't even bear children. According to Mullen, some of her initial programming was done at a camp for boys and girls run by an official at Tulane University Medical Center. She says that her programming continued until she graduated from high school in 1968, and that by that time she had been programmed with nearly 100 different personalities. Most of this material was unknown to her until October 1992 when she was attacked and raped in her home. It took 2.5 years. Wow. So she had a trauma that like superseded that mind control. It took 2.5 years to go to trial, Mullen states. And during the time I was in therapy, that's when the memories started coming back. I would never recommend going back to any place where abuse happened by yourself because you immediately go into a flashback. We went to some places around New Orleans that I had been to. One was a camp, an arsenal that's now a police training facility, and they allowed us to go in and look around. I went back to Tulane University. I showed her the room. I said, "It's room 301." And I described what the hall would look like, what was on the wall. And sure enough, a lot of it was the same. It was exactly the way I described it. Mullen says that she was experimented on at Edgewood Arsenal and is able to verify her account through the memories of some people who were there at the time. Quote, "It did turn out that one of the people who was verifying the information that I sent interviewed different people. A couple of times they interviewed people that I actually remembered from my childhood that remembered me. Only they remembered me as Crystal Stone, which was my name back then. That's what they called me for the experiments." Mullen says that Dr. Sidney Gottlieb was involved in her programming. From 8 years to 16 years, about 8 years, he told me he raised goats. Of you and Cameron, they called a lot of them in as consultants. Next thing I knew, I would be called back to Tulane, and here was Cameraman, her nickname for him, Cameron. He came in around 1960 when I was 9 or 10. He was there a lot at first, testing how much electricity was too much. They didn't want to fry my brain or anything because they needed me to seem fairly intelligent because I had to associate with people. Her memories of Dr. Green are extensive. Next to Heath, I guess he had the most authority, or whatever you want to call it. He was a German doctor. Liam was his first name, but he hated being called anything but Dr. Green. He was head of Edgewood Arsenal. That's where his office was, in Fort Detrick, Maryland. But he came to Tulane quite a bit and worked with Dr. Heath on the projects. He told me when I was about 14 or 15, he told one of my shadows or multiple personalities the story, how he got involved. He said he was Jewish and he was in a concentration camp when the war ended and the Nazis had killed his sister and put him in a concentration camp. He had met the angel of death, Mengele, there, and that was his hero. And he used to love watch him do experiments on twins and everything. Dr. Green said he was put in the camp when he was 15. But when the war ended, the United States paid to bring him back to the US and put him through medical school. And now they paid him to do these experiments. Mullen recalls they had no reason to think they had to hide anything from me. So they would have conversations about the projects, about so-and-so, what he's working on, where he is, where he's from. They would call each other by name. They would have suitcases with their name tags on them, briefcases. I met with Richard Helms, who was deputy director of the CIA, for a long time. I met with him lots of times. I mean, I got to know them all on a first name basis. They would say, "Call me uncle." Of course, every now and then they would expect a favor, but then you would be assured they were not being filmed. Somehow they managed to film almost everything until you got sent out into the field as, an operative to target these officials and get them on film. The idea being they wouldn't want a child who had been abused over a long period of time. They would want a child who was innocent and pure, and this was your first time. You were taught other ways to please men. I'm not reading this. I'm sorry. I am not reading that. Ugh. Okay. Under the umbrella folder, the first one was artichoke, which could produce amnesia and also to develop polygraph techniques. There was Delta, MK Naomi, which was germ warfare. They were laughing about how they would drop canisters of toxins. MK Naomi, you think COVID's under that? They had no idea what effect it was going to have. They would just wait 5 or 10 years and see what the effects on this neighborhood was. A poor neighborhood. I've heard about towns like that. There's a town in Massachusetts I know where people like all got this kind of not super common cancer, but they all got it. I mean, who knows what was behind it. I was told about using retarded children in East New Orleans and exposing them to large doses of massive radiation. And they saw no reason to use them because they were already retarded. They just wanted to see what anomalies would develop over the years. On October 23rd, 1997, Claudia Mullen was shot. For months, she was hooked up to a respirator and is still undergoing a series of surgeries at this writing in May 1999. She believes that she knows who the assailant was, but is unable to discuss the person's identity pending litigation. Wow. So Claudia Mullen did correspond with the author in March and May in 1999, Jim Keith. She also was interviewed by Will Snodgrass for CKLN FM radio in Toronto in July 1997. And that was, another thing is mind control survivors' testimony at the Human Radiation Experiments hearing. Wow. Should we do one more? It's a short one. We'll slip one in. Yes, Kat Douglas, I've had this feeling before. She says, I feel like I have to take a shower in holy water. The idea of such people and lives lost with this disgusting disregard for anyone. It's super upsetting. It's super upsetting. But I have respect for Jim Keith, and he makes it very clear, like at this point, it's not easy to document this stuff, but he's saying who said it. Investigate. Maybe more has come out since then. Let's hope it's wrong. Let's hope it's all a complete lie. Let's hope this is fiction. That would be great. That would be great. I'll read this last chapter. It's short. Chapter 18, Bryce Taylor. Other believed survivors of government mind control programs have come forward to tell their stories. One such person is the pseudonymous Bryce Taylor. Born in 1951, Taylor speaks without hesitation about being the victim of CIA mind control programming. Although in an interview with the author, she confides that she fears that one day all the information that she has stored in her mind will suddenly come pouring forth and overwhelm her. Taylor recalls that after a 1985 auto incident in which her head was smashed through a windshield, she began recovering memory, experiencing flashbacks of her programming and mind-controlled missions. Beginning in 1988, Taylor sought deprogramming from a therapist. Her therapy continued every day for 6 years, and she spent, according to her estimate, a total of $300,000 on recovery. In an attempt to escape mind control, Taylor left her husband and children, whom she believes are still victims of programming. At present, the mind programming of her 20-year-old daughter is breaking down. Taylor relates to me, so that the woman is currently in a near catatonic state, drooling and in diapers. Whoa. According to Taylor, from infancy, her personality was progressively shattered by her father. She believes that he was also a victim of programming and used CIA dissociative techniques on her in order to transform her into a mind-controlled slave. Taylor believes that from childhood, she was sold as a prostitute and used in pornography. She states that at the Baptist Sunday school she attended as a child, the minister and secretary of the church practiced witchcraft. In a short memoir of her experiences, Taylor reported, I don't know. What do you guys think? Should I read this? It's kind of bad. Well, I'm going to take the YouTube down anyway. She says, I started menstruating. This heralded abuse and rituals involving getting raped and impregnated sometimes twice a year. When the fetuses were 2 to 3 months old, they were aborted at rituals and ingested to fulfill the beliefs of the group that it made those participating more powerful. These were devastating, deeply traumatizing, and painful experiences that were repressed along with the other traumas. Bryce Taylor believes that throughout childhood, she was abused and programmed at military bases, including Edwards Air Force Base, 29 Palms, and Point Mugu Naval Base. Among the techniques, this is so upsetting. I can't barely read it. It's really nuts. Among the techniques she says were employed on her were sensory deprivation chambers, spin chambers, and light and sound entertainment technologies. She says that she was programmed at a number of other locations, including Barking Sands Missile Base in Hawaii and the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute, where drugs, light and sound, and sophisticated computerized methods were used on her under the supervision of Louis Jolyon West. Taylor reports that her owner was a popular Hollywood entertainer whom she names. Yes, I remember this part. He was much more than an entertainer. Entertainment was actually just a clever hobby of his. I witnessed his participation as a strategically placed, influential, and integrated part of an underworld group that secretly sought to control the world. He maintained direct ties to the White House. Can we get a year, Bryce? Can we get a year? She was born in 1951. So if she was young, yeah, this would be in the 60s. She recalls that for her 16th birthday, her husband to be surprised her with a visit by train to the San Diego Zoo. According to Taylor, once on the train, she was delivered to a private car where the entertainer, a well-known politician, and 2 other men awaited her. Yeah, and she had to do stuff with them while other people watched. Starlight was the name that the entertainer gave her. Starlight was one of my alter personalities. She was to become his starlet. The entertainer took me to several of Hugh Hefner's penthouse parties in Los Angeles. There were windows all around, and at night you could see all the twinkling lights of the city. According to Taylor, she was prostituted to members of the Rat Pack of Hollywood celebrities. As an adult, Taylor says that she had fully taken on the characteristics of a multiple personality, quote, presidential model mind slave used as a courier and sexual toy for government leaders and other world figures. I have heard of that. About, wasn't JFK's, one of his girlfriends, a courier? What was her name? Judy? I don't remember. She says that she was also used as a human tape recorder to store the text of secret documents by the use of her photographic memory. This was done so that these high-level players could communicate without records or physical connections within their cabal, a group whose total intention is to bring about a fascist new world order. We talked about this last time. Mary Pinchot Meyer, and I haven't looked up her dad, Aaron Pinchot, yet, but her husband, Cord Meyer, wanted to be president of the world, and they were trying to get JFK to buy into this. Taylor alleges that she was programmed to sexually service politicians. I was used extensively on or around 1968 by top politicians, guaranteed by the Central Intelligence Agency that my training in Project Monarch ensured the highest level of security. The level of mind control I possessed guaranteed that I could be used with these leaders who were involved at the highest levels of national security without my own awareness. I wonder what Monica Lewinsky's story was. Taylor says she went to Alcatraz and other locations and saw mind control programming being done at those sites. Taylor indicates that she was also prostituted to several presidents. What many of the CIA may or may not have been aware of was that a powerful group of men, whom I will call the Council, secretly ran the government. Isn't that one of John Coleman's words? The Council was also able to access me and had programmed me to subversively influence top government officials in ways that benefited them. The CIA's latest technology was being used against our own government. The council studied people's psychological profiles and knew exactly what their likes and dislikes were, their sexual preferences, what perfume they liked, and any other information that could be used to influence individuals in ways of which they were never even aware. The council would pre program me with instructions, all based on careful research of the targeted person, of what to wear, how to act, what type of sexual stance to take, specific words or phrases to say, and the best time to deliver them. The council always worked up a complete strategy and never sent me to a person unprepared. Man, I wonder if anyone's ever nailed down those techniques just for legit use. You know what I mean? Like, you got a crush on somebody, how do you really get to them? But I guess you'd have to make a study of them, and that's not very honest. Taylor has penned an autobiography titled Starshine, written in fictionalized format. She says, in order to protect her from reprisal, and as of May 1999, has finished a more complete statement of her experience called Thanks for the Memories. The Truth Has Set Me Free. Man. Perhaps the most persuasive validation of Taylor's recollections comes from mind control researcher Walter Bowert, who recalls seeing Taylor at a charity event in Palm Springs in the company of the entertainer who she says allegedly controlled her. I think we can connect those dots at this point of who that person may be. He says that she was just another of the many hostess types that you find working the parties in the Coachella Valley. Other physical proof consists of what she characterizes as numerous stun gun marks over her body. What is the truth about what happened to Bryce Taylor? Admittedly, her story is incredible, outrageous, and bears little resemblance to what is commonly thought of as reality. Because of the outlandish details of her story, linking mind control programming to various prominent entertainers and politicians, one is tempted to reject her story out of hand. The difficulty is that when speaking with her, one does not detect lying. Okay, fast forward to today. This is, what did we say, 1999? And the P. Diddy thing right now, 2024, 25 years later, this stuff isn't unbelievable at all. So now you can go back and look at those details and actually start to suspect specific individuals, and then start to make sense of some of the events, some of their behavior, some of their opinions, the influence they had. Man, oh man, oh man, oh man. Ooh-wee. That was a tough one. So we're gonna wrap this up right now. And next time we're doing chapter 19, Catherine Sullivan. You know, you would think I hadn't read this before, but I did read it. And sometimes when stuff shocks you, you forget it. Like, why a good joke, you can never remember the punchline of the good jokes because they shock you and it makes you not remember. Anyway, with that, I think I'm gonna go take that shower in holy water. and hopefully this one, the next book I read, isn't so disturbing. This, we still have a good, a good few, maybe 3 more episodes left. So let's hope we can get through it. Thanks, guys. This is Monica Perez.